In Guild Wars 2, the effectiveness of your gear caps off at Ascended rarity, and about 5% stat increase over exotic gear, the rarity under it. Due to the nature of the game, once you have the Ascended gear with the stat prefixes for your build, that's all you'll need for the rest of your time playing. There's no gear treadmill or having to reacquire new gear when a new expansion drops, and I love that. You aren't forced to continually chase for power once you've acquired it, and on top of that, Ascended gear is relatively easy to get. But there's also a tier above Ascended, Legendary. While it isn't stronger than Ascended gear, it comes with some insane quality of life benefits. I'm talking free and infinite stat changes, being able to transmog without transmutation charges, and most important of all, Legendary gear can be equipped to any character, with the only limitation being they're able to equip that type of item. These features make Legendaries the pinnacle of gearing in Guild Wars 2, providing bonuses not only to the character you made it for, but for all your alts as well, and only for the low cost of about a 6-month grind. Okay, that's a bit of an overstatement. If you just focus on crafting a Legendary and nothing else, it'd probably take about a month. But I spent a lot of my time in game doing other things and kind of lacking on the grind, so it took me longer to get where I am now. My last Guild Wars 2 video was on my closing thoughts on fractals and my grind to get the Legendary backpack ad infinitum. I had a lot of fun getting to that point, but the time and grind behind it was relatively massive for me. 4 tiers of collection and crafting steps consisting of bringing items to specific locations, doing fractal challenge modes, and draining like half my material bank. It was a long grind, but knowing it was for a capstone piece of gear that I wouldn't have to grind for again, unless I want to, made it so much more satisfying when I made it. And that initial feeling sparked the urge for me to go for the long haul. I wanted to fill every gear slot that I could with legendaries. Now, this won't be a comprehensive guide to legendary crafting. I will be going over and name dropping specific components and materials for the sake of clarity, but this series is more about my journey and experiences related to getting these items. There are plenty of guide videos out there on how to get a legendary, but not many people talking about their personal experiences with the grind, and that's the style of video I'm going for here. Second, this video is not my full legendary journey. I'm not even close to finishing it. This is going to be a series starting with the other 3 I have now, and this is my warning that by the time the series is over, this horse is going to be a fucking red stain in the ground. With that preamble out of the way, let's talk legendaries. Before I could even access any legendary crafting, I had a prerequisite that I needed to complete. The Central Tyria legendary crafting... The Central Tyria legendary crafting mastery track. God, that's so many words. Yeah, I never explained masteries in any of my other Guild Wars videos, so let me give you a quick rundown. After a character reaches max level, they still earn XP, but it instead goes to your account's mastery level. When that bar fills up, you spend mastery points to unlock account upgrades, and mastery points are earned through 2 different methods: completing a specific achievement, or communing with a mastery point in the open world. Mastery points and XP are exclusive to the area they're earned from, meaning if you're mob grinding in Heart of Thorns zones, you're only getting mastery points and XP for the Heart of Thorns mastery tracks. There are many masteries in this game that give a ton of benefits, but the ones I'm keying in on in this video are the 4 tiers of legendary crafting unlocks. In my time playing so far, I'd gotten enough mastery points to eke my way through most of them. I had gotten enough to unlock 3 out of the 4 levels, granting me access to the tier 1 and 2 exotic perfected weapons, basically the precursors of the precursors, and ascended precursor recipes. However, in order to craft the legendary gear themselves, I needed about 7 more Central Tyria mastery points. Now, if this mastery track was the only Central Tyria mastery I was leveling, the remaining 7 points wouldn't be that hard to acquire, as there's a ton of them that are basically given to you for free. However, before I started this grind, I had already maxed out or gotten a couple levels in other tracks, so I was left scrounging for the rest of those mastery points. I spent a while just scrolling through my achievement log trying to find easy objectives to complete and getting frustrated at all the fucking tabs to flip through, and after a few minutes of struggling too long, it dawned on me. The Guild Wars 2 wiki makers are absolute chads and have a single list of Central Tyria masteries, and there's options to show which ones you've completed, and if it's an open world point, the wiki tells you the closest waypoint. This saved me a lot of frustration and made getting the remaining mastery points a breeze to get. With the mastery track completed, the first legendary that I wanted to craft was a sword, the Shining Blade. I wanted to go for a sword because my main profession, Mesmer, uses sword in 2 different builds I have, and it's a weapon type that all my alts can use. Of all the legendary swords, this one looked the coolest to me at the time, and I just really liked its color scheme. So I went to Lion's Arch, talked to Grandmaster Hobbs, then started my journey. The first step was to craft the exotic swords Exemplar's Edge and Vengeance, each requiring Orichalcum weapon components, sheets of charged ambrite, and shards of the crown, a material I'll soon be very familiar with. The only thing that was a grind here were the shards of the crown. 1 shard is made from 1 tribute to the queen, 1 mystic curio, 30 mithril ingots, and 20 elderwood planks. And the mystic curios are crafted from 35 tier 5 mob drops, 15 mithril ingots, and 10 elderwood planks. To all my new and non-Guild Wars players watching, I know I'm just speaking a bunch of gobbledygook to you, but trust me, this will make sense soon. Notice how I said mithril ingots and elderwood planks a couple times already though? For just 1 shard, I needed 45 ingots and 30 planks. And I needed 90 shards total for both exotics. Now, because I'm stubborn, I was gonna just try and farm all the materials myself, but I quickly realized the trading post was my friend in this game, because it'd likely take me literal years to get just the exotics if I tried to grind for the roughly 4,000 materials, not including the mob drops, for these shards. So, I ran content to farm up gold to buy what I needed, mostly running strikes and fractals since they pay out well, but I was also doing a lot of open world content for another legendary I was working toward, but we'll put a pin in that for now. Whenever I could, I also gathered in the open world and salvaged any low rarity equipment I got to get even more materials, and bit by bit, I was trying to lower the amount of gold I needed to put into the trading post. And in about 2 weeks, I crafted both the exotic swords, Vengeance and Exemplar's Edge. This was the first milestone in my crafting journey, and I was glad to put it behind me. Once I crafted the 2 exotics, I had access to the recipe for the next weapon to craft, the Ascended Precursor, Save the Queen. And when I opened the crafting window to check the recipe, my moment of joy was immediately cut short as I was met with a whopping 100 shards of the crown crafting cost. So, I got back to my usual farming routes, fractals and strikes whenever I could, and at this time I was getting deeper into raiding, so I joined LFGs for that whenever the option was available. When I was done with those, I ran more open world content. I spent a lot of time mostly wandering around and stumbling on dynamic events, and would hawk the wiki for large metas I could squad up for. I wasn't really encouraged to seek specific events here. This was all in the name of getting more gold and materials to craft. Well, everything really. Like the previous weapons, my biggest hurdle was just the sheer amount of materials I needed for the shards of the crown. But in about a week, I had the Ascended Precursor, Save the Queen, crafted, and I was happy. But I learned from my legendary backpack that getting the Precursor is roughly half the grind. And from here, it gets real. You see, Save the Queen was just one of 4 items I needed to craft my legendary. To craft the Shining Blade, I also needed 1 Mystic Tribute, 1 Gift of the Blade, and either a Gift of Desert or Maguma Mastery. To forge my sword, I'll be required to engage in all game modes, so PvE, Structured PvP, and World vs. World. By this point, I hadn't really put a lot of time into either of the last 2, so I had my own worries about them that I'll touch on when I get to their components. For now, I want to talk about the Gift of Mastery. A Gift of Mastery is a milestone crafting material made from different components, found almost exclusively from their respective expansion zones. One of the major components of these gifts comes from their open world map completion. There's a Gift of Mastery for every expansion and the base game, but for crafting the Shining Blade, I had a choice between getting the Gift of Maguma Mastery from the Heart of Thorns expansion, or a Gift of Desert Mastery from Path of Fire. Now, I'm a little bitch, and even with mounts in the safety net of playing Mesmer, the Heart of Thorns zones intimidate me, so I opted to go for the Gift of Desert Mastery. To make it, I needed to combine a Gift of the Desert, a Gift of the Rider, 1 Bloodstone Shard, and 250 Funerary Incense in the Mystic Forge. The Gift of the Desert is the map completion item. There wasn't much difficulty in this area as the maps weren't particularly dangerous, however, I had a lot of fun just roaming around and taking in the scenery. It's a lot of open vistas that really helps sell the massive desert setting. There was a nice balance of convincing stretches of arid nothingness, broken up by natural landmarks, ruins, and civilization. The structures and landmarks scattered around made the points of interest cool, and the vistas are gorgeous. It took about a day of meandering around the Crystal Desert and checking the wiki to find tucked away entrances to the POIs, and by the end of it, I had a gift of map completion for every Path of Fire zone. The only thing I needed to do after that was combine them all in the Mystic Forge. Then I had my gift of the desert. From here though, the grind starts to crank up. The gift of the rider was the next item I set my sights on. I needed to talk to 4 heart vendors around the Crystal Desert and buy items from them using Elegy Mosaics, a currency acquired from major Path of Fire meta events on a daily cooldown. For this, I had enough mosaics from just playing the game that I was able to get 2 out of the 4 I needed. The other 2, I had to run Crystal Desert events for a few days to get enough mosaics, my favorite being Casino Blitz, an event where you collect coins scattered around marked locations on the map. If everyone collects enough coins, the event advances to the next round to do it again. Do this a total of 3 times and the event ends and moves on to a bonus round, where everyone needs to chase down and destroy a giant piñata. It's such a chill activity to run that has a surprisingly nice amount of rewards to it, and with it being so laid back, there's a lot of downtime to just chit-chat with the other players. And after about a week of running metas, I got the last few mosaics I needed to be able to craft my gift of the rider. Great, that's 3 of 4 items I needed for the gift of Desert Mastery. The last material I needed was 250 Funerary Incense. I didn't know what that was at the time, so I checked the wiki and oh, it's a material purchase from a vendor. Cool. So I found out where the vendor is, without checking the price mind you, and ran over to it. Just to be kicked in the face by the price tag. If I wanted those 250 Funerary Incense, I needed 250 globs of ectoplasm, amalgamated gemstones, and obsidian shards, and a whopping 750 Elegy mosaics. For reference, the gift of the rider cost me 300. The amalgamated gemstones for it were also a bit tricky to acquire. Just about every large-scale meta offers you a chest at the end of it that lets you choose various high-value materials as a reward, and a single amalgamated gemstone is one of the options. Sweet. So, I spent some time running metas all over the game, with a focus more on Path of Fire events, but after a few days of event farming and getting like 12 gemstones and maybe 60 mosaics, I decided to put a pin on my target farm to go after another item. Just know, throughout the rest of this crafting process, I was running events basically back to back when squads filled up, farming out both mosaics and gemstones. While I was going for those, I started chipping away at the next major material, the Gift of the Blade. Crafted from a Gift of the Mist, 100 Mystic Runestones, a Gift of Metal, and 100 Shards of the Crown. I thought I was fucking done with these, but here we go again. I started going for the Gift of the Mist first, made of 4 items from PvP game modes. One of the first that I crossed off the list was a Gift of Glory. To get this, you either need to play PvP and earn 250 Shards of Glory from PvP reward tracks, or you could buy the shards directly from the trading post. I opted to dip my toes into PvP and earn all the currency myself, partly because I wanted to, and also because I'm frugal and would rather not spend the little gold I had at the time. Also because I'm not a little bitch. Before this, I played PvP for a short stint, but it was mostly just trying out the game mode without fully knowing what I was doing. My first PvP experience was full of me dying, getting chain CC'd, and chased down every match. So I was not excited to have to play it again. But I really wanted to earn as much of what I could without trading, so I had to jump back in. But this time, I changed my approach. I started looking at builds and used some that were recommended on community sites. I was trying to pay more attention to fights and manage my stun breaks and dodge rolls better, and doing that made the experience so much more fun. It helped that by this time I'd played more professions in PvE, so I had a better grasp of what they did and what casts I needed to watch out for, giving me a better innate understanding of the battlefield. I was still getting my shit kicked in, sure. No amount of game knowledge would prepare me for players with years of experience, but I was getting a better hold of what I was being done in by, which in turn made me want to get better. I ended up having a lot of fun doing this, so much so that this little foray started my slow descent into the rank grind, but that's a topic for another video. For now, I can tell you that I got the 250 shards, then immediately went to the Mystic Forge vendor to cash in a Gift of Glory. Because I was still avoiding World v World, I proceeded to set out to craft the next major component for the Legendary, a Mystic Tribute. Similar to the Gift of Fortune from my second Fractals video, a Mystic Tribute is an item made up of different tiers of mob materials. And like, a lot of them. Of all the major components I needed, this was the least interesting. I didn't even record myself crafting it. This is also one of the things I was working on in the background, but after enough time passed and I was on the cusp of finishing it out, I bought the rest of the materials off the trading post. With the Mystic Tribute crafted, and a whole lot of yapping out of the way, that's still only 2 out of the 4 items I needed to forge the Shining Blade. And while I was still on a crafting kick, I decided to get the gift of metal I needed knocked out too. By this point, the amount of gold I had made me a lot more comfortable buying non-specialty material. It's too much raw material grinding to do on my own, so like everything else, the trading post was my best friend in helping me finish it. With the gift of metal out of the way, I had 2 out of 4 components I needed for a gift of the blade. The only thing I was missing through normal crafting means were those shards of the crown, but I'd been steadily stockpiling on the mystic curios needed to craft them, as that was the most expensive material to buy. When I got close to getting the 100 I needed, I figured I'd earn a decent amount of materials through World v World, and decided to finally dip my toes into the open world PvP game mode. Besides the scale of the encounters, the other big difference between structured PvP and World v World are your stats. Structured PvP uses a more normalized stat system where every player gets the choice of one amulet and rune set for their stats. However, in World v World, your gear stats and level determines your attributes, and it isn't normalized. I'd heard people talking about World v World before and how it was this brutal game mode, catered to higher end, hardcore players, and I need a whole new set of gear to even be able to have any semblance of a good time. It made me shy away from the game mode until I was absolutely required to do it for this legendary. From World v World, I needed 2 items, a Gift of Battle and a Gift of War. The former is obtained by redeeming 250 Memories of Battle, a currency earned from the game mode's reward tracks intermittently, just like the Gift of Glory, and the latter is the final reward in the Gift of War reward track. While the Memories of Battle could be bought off the trading post, I decided to not waste any gold since I needed to complete a reward track for the other item anyways. I went into World v World for the first time with my PvE gear, meaning I was rocking glass cannon stats. However, that wasn't my only issue. Like PvP, the traits you want to use and the roles you want to cover are completely different than PvE. So I went into the game mode and immediately started having a rough time. I was doing this excursion on my main Mesmer using the Chronomancer spec, and the only part of my build that I changed was switching one of my offhand weapons. I didn't even change my utility skills. Because of that, I spent like 20 minutes getting chased down if I veered away from the Zerg, and when large-scale fights broke out, I had to resort to just sniping people with Greatsword 1 and 3, because my clones would die immediately upon spawning, and if I got close to anyone, they'd just out-survive me. I spent that time just bumbling around and hoping to find any good fights, until I realized I was just at a major disadvantage because of my build and gear. So, I went back to Lion's Arch, opened up Meta Battle, and copied the traits of a Zerg build. It would have been wiser for me to get a set of cheap exotic gear to be statted out better for fights, but I only planned on playing the game mode until I finished the reward track, so I decided not to spend the gold. It was still a bit perilous since I didn't have the right stats, but the trait and skill changes helped a lot with my survivability and made my experience generally more enjoyable. I played through a few sessions of World v World until I completed the Gift of War reward track. In those sessions, I'd find commanders running around the map in open squads looking for people to help Zerg, and those are the most fun moments. There'd oftentimes be multiple commanders per team running around the map, coordinating with each other to take objectives and warn us about upcoming sieges. Then there'd be people roaming around on their own, spying on the enemies and taking minor objectives along the way, all while the two other teams were doing the same thing. I think how dynamic and fluid the game mode is what really makes it shine. Squads will go from skirmishing out in the open to sieging a keep, where we needed to set up cannons, ballista, and trebuchets to break down the walls and storm in, all while the enemy team shows up in force, pelting us with their own attacks. It was an active war zone with pockets of people breaking out into their own duels in a massive storm of bodies, with one goal in mind, depending on what side you're on. Protect that lord, or kill that fucking lord. And at the drop of a dime, we could switch from offense to defense, for any reason. Mostly because an enemy team is trying to take a major objective of ours, then it'd be a scramble to leave the fight, teleport to the closest waypoint, and still stay somewhat organized with the rest of the squad so we aren't just trickling in on the defense. Even though I was just fodder throughout most of it, I was still having a lot of fun. I'm a sucker for large-scale siege gameplay, and World v World for sure scratched that itch. However, I was still only here for the gift of battle, so once that reward track ticked off, I went right back to the Mistlog Sanctuary. This short excursion has piqued my interest in the game mode more than I would have thought, and after experiencing it, I can say it's a lot less daunting than the community made me believe. I want to play it more, but that'll be at a different time. With the Gift of Battle and Gift of War in hand, I finally had all the materials for a Gift of the Mists, but I was still missing a lot for those shards of the crown. I had most of the mystic curios I needed, but I was still missing tons of ingots and logs to craft the shards, so I went back to the trading post, spent 53 gold, then went on to craft the rest of them. After staring at the crafting UI for a couple minutes, I walked over to the Mystic Forge to melt everything into a Gift of the Blade. With that done, I just had one more major component to craft before my legendary was completed. The two things holding me back from my Gift of Desert Mastery were these dumb fuck items I get only a handful a day from metas. Well, sometime while I was grinding those, I stumbled across a commander running something called Legendary Bounties, an activity where you hunt down a boss mob with special mechanics attached to it. This was a new thing to me, but all my Path of Fire metas were done for the day, and I thought it wouldn't hurt to try something different. And holy shit, I'm so glad I did this. You see, the main reward for completing these bounties are Elegy Mosaics, anywhere from 2 to 50 depending on your luck. There's multiple legendary bounties per map, meaning someone running a bounty train that is hunting multiple back-to-back can reward you with a pretty sizable amount of mosaics. This was another huge discovery for me, so I shifted a lot of my mosaic farming from the daily metas to hawking LFG for bounty train commanders. I didn't find people running it every day, but whenever I did, I rolled with a group until the commander quit. These legendary bounties weren't particularly difficult, especially with an entire squad of people, but there was something so fun about roaming around 30 people deep looking to kill a world boss. It may not look like it, but this is peak MMO gameplay right here. A bunch of random people coming together for a shared goal, casually bantering with each other, and completely welcoming to anyone willing to join. Until these bounty trains, I'd always be the person looking at the squads of people running around the map and joining in, but to be on the inside and see people trickle in, it felt different. It really felt like I was part of the nurturing and welcome community that this game's known for. I always sleep on the open world content because I'm more of an instance content enjoyer, but every time that I'm made to tackle it, I always have a good time. Looking back on it, those bounty farms were probably some of the most fun that I had in pursuit of the Shining Blade. The second item holding me back, amalgamated gemstones, I found out could be crafted, but at a fairly significant cost. I needed to either farm up or buy rare gemstones in bulk to upgrade them into amalgamated gemstones, and when I say in bulk, I really mean that. I needed over 2,000 gems to get the amalgamated gemstones I needed. This was another large gold sink for me, but after farming out metas and having the amount of mosaics I needed, I decided to just eat the gold costs in the name of expediting the process. Once I was done crafting those gemstones, I went back to the Tomb of the Primeval King and got my 250 funerary incense. Then, I teleported straight back to Mistlog Sanctuary to combine that, my Gifts of the Rider and Desert, and one Bloodstone Shard to create a Gift of Desert Mastery. With that made, the last thing I needed to do was combine the 4 items I spent so long working on. This was months of on and off focus farming to get here. I was so excited for this. And boom, that was my first legendary weapon, the Shining Blade. One thing that I really like about legendaries is the flair that they have. They all have unique weapon drawing effects, trails, and projectiles if the profession has those on the weapon. I'm not a huge fan of the footfalls of the sword, but its look, draw effect, and weapon trail are so cool, and even if the fashion of my main specialization, Virtuoso, doesn't use it, nothing will beat the sheer utility that legendaries provide. Plus, I think I make great use of it on my Chronomancer. With the Shining Blade out of the way, it was time to move on to the next. I opted to go for something easier to make as my material shortage was still in recovery mode after making all those shards. Thankfully, there's a legendary that can be acquired without crafting. The Prismatic Champion's Regalia is a legendary amulet obtained entirely through achievements, but the only caveat to that is those achievements involve going through every Living World season. For the non-Guild Wars 2 players, Living World seasons are like mini expansions that were released between the major expansions that introduces new stories, maps, metas, masteries, etc. I think the only thing Living World seasons don't add are profession additions and stat prefixes. They add just about everything else, just at a smaller scale compared to the big expansions. Living World episodes are paid content, but if you were logged in during the release of a Living World story chapter, you got the episode for free. However, the way that they're purchased is a bit different. While expansions can only be purchased in full and with real money, Living World episodes can be bought either with real money or gems. You can also buy the story chapters individually if you want, let's say because you only want access to a specific map, meta, or vendor found in one of the chapters. However, the overall price is discounted if you buy an entire season, and the legendary is locked behind doing every chapter anyways. I bought all the Living World episodes a little while after I finished End of Dragons, and I'd played some of the episodes a little bit, but that was mostly just to unlock things that were on my radar, like the Roller Beetle. It wasn't until I started grinding for legendaries that I started to actually put time into all the Living World content. Before this, I just started doing the Living World seasons in random order, and on different characters. The path to obtaining this legendary isn't a material grind, rather it's an objective grind that had me doing basically a lot of similar things per season, with a few unique challenges mixed in. The basics for each achievement was to do the story chapters, participate in a certain number of events, and gather a set amount of materials for each map. Those achievements were easy to do because they just came naturally from playing the game. The gathering is just gathering, I don't really need to talk about that much, but the stories and metas I really enjoyed doing. I want to talk a bit about the story, so I should say this part will contain spoilers, so skip ahead to here to avoid them. This isn't a story deep dive, and I did them out of order. In fact, I didn't get to doing any of the Living World until after I completed the expansions. This had me spoiled on the story a bit because I knew what characters would be around in the future and who wouldn't, so the narrative stakes were lessened a bit for me. It's one of the trade-offs of this game, since you can experience content in any order you choose. But I think even when I saw a character that I knew wouldn't be around, there was always some intrigue in what situations they'd get in. Like, I knew Timey would be around for a while, but every time she was captured or in trouble, the tension of the moment was still felt. One of the big things I noticed while going through it was the gradual increase in cutscene and set piece quality. The farther along I went, animations got smoother, the cutscenes got more detail, and more dynamic things were happening on screen. Like, compare the cutscenes between Living World Season 2 and Season 4, and no matter what people say about Icebrood Saga, that final cutscene is peak fucking cinema. This isn't to undermine the earlier Living Worlds, the areas and stories are great regardless, but the latter seasons just have more oomph to them. My favorite was Living World Season 4. With a deeply involved plot and some incredible set-piece missions, I was locked in the entire way through. The narrative's also pretty meaty, focusing on and killing 2 big bads in one season, and while playing through it, I never felt like any plot points were rushed. Both Joko's and Kralkatork's arcs had enough time to naturally progress through them, and they led naturally into each other. The Blish mission where you escape from the mist and the mission where you fly alongside Tobruk are some of my favorites in the game. And Dragonfall is peak map design. The entire landmass being what's basically the corpse of this elder dragon really helps sell the scale of how massive this guy is. To me, the weakest Living World season is Icebrood Saga. It's really just the last few chapters that drag the season down for me, at least narratively. It starts off great, with a nicely layered plot involving the Char and Jormag and cool story instances to go along with it. But then it just drops the ball by introducing a new big bad, Primordius, in the fucking last episode, makes you do what's basically instance meta events back to back, then funnels you into an admittedly cool showdown that kills both the elders. I think more time should have been spent on Primordius' arc. He basically got introduced and killed in the span of one episode, and there wasn't much time spent on the Elder Dragon. Moving on from the story though, the events I had to do were actually a great tool to expose me to content that I probably would have never engaged with. The objective for each season was to complete about 10 to 15 events per map, and if there was a major event there, to do that at least once. A lot of the generic events gave fairly decent material rewards, but the best were from the major events. Not only were they all fun to run with cool bosses to fight, but the map currencies and chest rewards at the end of them gave me so many materials. As far as the timeline goes, I started chipping away at this legendary while I was going for the Shining Blade, and doing those metas made me realize there were so many ways to gain crafting materials that I was never short on farming spots. And as a bonus, each Living World season had vendors with easy access to ascended trinkets that were really only locked behind their map currencies. This gave me other methods besides fractals for obtaining extra gear for alts. I was glad that these achievements exposed me to all these activities, as they gave me a ton of extra options to enjoy the open world content. My favorite metas belong to my GOAT Season 4 and Icebrood Saga. They both have a really good mix of mob grinder events and coordinated boss encounters. For Season 4, my favorite event is the Battle of Dragonfall, a map-wide event where you complete smaller events to build up for a siege. It's chill and usually always populated, whether it be for people that are just farming mobs or trying to coordinate the event's completion. Not to mention all the map currency you're practically flooded with at the end of it. Then we have Icebrood Saga, where, despite my story grievances, is filled with cool metas in all of their zones. My favorite of them being the entire Drizzlewood coast map. It's kind of cheating because the map's one large meta event where players slowly take map objectives up to a final siege event with multiple boss encounters. Now that I'm saying this aloud, I just really like these multi-stage map-wide events. It's another shining example of peak MMO gameplay. A bunch of random people rolling around together, all in the name of a shared goal with plenty of time to socialize and make connections. A lot of the Living World maps included jumping puzzles, with varying degrees of difficulty, and the Return to achievements made sure I did all of them. They were a lot of fun, and I enjoyed doing most of them. It offered a nice change of pace from doing missions or killing enemies. For the most part, the path forward was always clear, and the difficulty was figuring out how to get to that next platform. A lot of times it'd be just in sight, but too high up or too far out of reach to take a direct route, and it was up to me, or the wiki, to figure out how to get there. They were fun, and a nice little bit of side content to do, but there were 2 jumping puzzles, so ungodly esoteric, I could only imagine the ANET devs taking Everest-sized lines before designing them. Chalice of Tears made me want to jump into a real-life volcano with how ridiculous some of the jumps were. One of them requires an almost pixel-perfect landing that doesn't even look like a spot you should be jumping to. Then there's the time jumps, blind jumps, fucking slope jumps. There's so much to this single jumping puzzle, I'm genuinely astonished how people were able to do this without guides. Then there's the Searing Ascent, also belonging to a Season 3 zone. The platforming here wasn't as difficult. However, this jumping puzzle had long gliding sections where I just had to vibe check the path, around blind corners mind you, until I could find something to land on. This quickly turned out to be a fruitless effort, so for this puzzle and Chalice of Tears, I used a combination of the wiki and video guides to get through them. However, even with the assist, both puzzles took me actual hours to complete. I felt an actual weight lift off of my shoulders when I reached those grand chests at the end, and I was happy to be done with them. They were a nice little reward for doing the JPs, but I'd relate the experience to being punched in the balls by someone, then they give you $10. It's definitely someone's way of making money or having fun, but it's not really mine. With the return to achievements out of the way, the last part of this chain is to talk to some NPCs in the Eye of the North, listen to their dialogue, and at the end, claim the legendary. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I experienced a lot of cool content along the way. Buttering this deal, every few return to achievements I completed got me some pretty cool items, from a 24 slot bag to a legendary End of Dragons precursor weapon that I'll be cashing in a future video. For now, it's on to the third and final legendary for the video, the Obsidian Light Regalia. This is a legendary chess piece for light armor professions, that is, Mesmer, Elementalist, and Necromancer, gained through crafting and open world events related to the Secrets of the Obscure expansion. Just like the Shining Blade, I chose to go after this armor piece because my main character would be able to use it, and one of my favorite alts is also a light armor class. For this chess piece, I needed an Arcanum of Astral Heartbeat gained from skin collections, a gift of expertise from rift hunting, a gift of Stormy Skies from map completion and meta events, and a gift of magical prosperity through material grinding. I started with the gift of Stormy Skies, since I thought it'd be easiest to knock out of the way first, and the first part of it was. All I needed to do was run around the zones and interact with these orbs scattered around each one. It's basically just map completion in a way that's repeatable on the same character. I think it was the previous expansion to this one, End of Dragons, that first implemented this feature, and it's a welcome change. It makes you less alt-reliant for repeat generation legendaries, and I hope ANET adds this feature to Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire. But within about a week of meandering around the place, I had a map completion gift from each Soto zone, and chucked them all into the Mystic Forge to acquire a gift of the Astral Ward, one of 4 materials for the gift of Stormy Skies. The other 3 came from combining world materials rewarded for participating in any event in the Soto maps. Each zone had their own unique refined materials, a pouch of Stardust from Amnitas, a case of Capture Lightning from Skywatch Archipelago, and a clod of Congealed Screams from Inner Neos, with a crafting cost of 250 base material for 1 refined. And I needed 5 of each for this, totaling 1,250 of each zone's material. Now, the major events for each map gives me an option to get one of these refined materials per day, but I wasn't running them every day, and not every run was a successful one. I talked about them a little bit on my Secrets of the Obscure video, but I think the metas in this expansion are good. The main ones are multi-stage events with some cool encounters at the end. Definitely not as peak as other metas like Dragon's End or Dragon's Stand, but still enjoyable enough for me to want to hop in if it's running when I'm logged in. I think the mandatory Skyscale sections in all of them are kind of lame though, mostly because of how static they are. We're on mounts that can fly and shoot fucking fireballs. Please give us something besides a giant stationary target to hit. In time, I was able to grind out everything I needed and move on to the next. Sort of. You see, I also needed those same map materials for the Arcanum of Astral Heartbeat. This item is bought from a vendor, and on technicality costs only 1 vision crystal, a semi-rare material obtained through Ascended salvaging. But to unlock the ability to purchase this, I needed to unlock 3 chess piece skins from the Soto expansion. One of them is acquired partway through the story. That was easy to get. I had it since before I even started going for this. The others, however, required a gift of scales and 2 pouches of Stardust for 1. The other needed a gift of blood and 1 clod of Congealed Screams. Additionally, each chess piece had 2 other items as their purchase cost: Research Notes and Purified Rift Essence. Research Notes are acquired by salvaging crafted items using a research kit, with more notes being gained for more complex crafts. While somewhat annoying to get, there's a lot of ways to circumvent actually having to craft stuff yourself, like by doing Ascended salvaging. So here's acknowledgement to my GOAT Wizard's Vault for having Ascended gear in the shop. And to be fair, I'd been occasionally building up research notes just to have them, so I already had a small stockpile before going after this chess piece. However, the remaining few hundred notes I needed I'd gotten from Ascended salvaging, since I had a lot of leftover gear that I wasn't using. To my misfortune, this won't be the only time research notes are a part of this legendary's crafting, but I'll get to that later. The other material though, Purified Rift Essence, was slightly more of a grind to get. Crafted from 1 Mystic Clover and 1 Amalgamated Rift Essence. The Mystic Clovers I had in excess, so that wasn't an issue. However, the Amalgamated Rift Essence was something I'd quickly get familiar with for this legendary. Made from materials you get from completing Rift events, Rift Essence, there are 3 tiers of Rifts, and they each reward their respective tier of Rift Essence plus a few from the lower tiers. I only needed 2 Purified Rift Essences total to buy these other chest piece skins, so that itself wasn't a huge grind. However, the Amalgamated Rift Essences I needed for those skins competed with the whopping 12 I needed for the next major crafting component, the Gift of Expertise. To put it in perspective, that's thousands of Rift Essences of varying tiers that I needed to get a hold of through Rift farming. For doing that, I did the same thing as the legendary bounty trains for the Shining Blade. Join squads and roll up to events 50 people deep and completely mob the bosses. The fights weren't particularly difficult. It was the same quirk as the legendary bounties where each boss had 1 or 2 special mechanics that would just kill you if you failed or ignored them. They were never anything super intense. For example, one mechanic gives zones either in melee range or at range of the boss that you need to stand in to do damage, and another had the boss drop orbs that have spinning lasers around it that deals heavy damage. I thought the fights were great for open world difficulty. Nothing that forced people to seriously parse to succeed, but just enough to keep people focused on the encounter. I do think it's a little lame that the special mechanics were all recycled from previous bounties. I probably wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't just come off of bounty grinding before doing rifts, but I still think it's a shame that we didn't get any new mechanics with the rift bosses. Regardless of that though, I still stand by this being peak MMO gameplay. I'm always super excited to run content with massive blobs of people, and I think it's one of the biggest advantages of the genre. There aren't many games besides MMOs where you can engage in content this way, and Guild Wars 2 still supports this level of gameplay even after years of new content releases. It's another aspect of the game that keeps me coming back, and a few days of farming later, I had enough Rift Essences and map currency to pick up that Arcanum of Astral Heartbeat. Then, some weeks after that, I had enough essences to chuck 12 Amalgamated Essences, 1 Eldritch Scroll, 50 Obsidian Shards, and 1 cube of Stabilized Dark Energy into the Mystic Forge to receive my Gift of Expertise. With that done, I only had 1 more item to get before my legendary chest piece was completed, the Gift of Magical Prosperity. Of the 4 items this material is made from, there were only 2 that were a bit tricky to get. The Gift of Research and the Gift of Craftsmanship. The latter is bought from any faction provisioner for 50 provisioner tokens, earned from either challenge mode raids or traded with the vendors for different items, with the second option having a weekly trade cap. Now, if I was starting this grind from zero, these tokens would be a genuine pain to get. I don't really run raid CMs, and the materials these vendors accept are random and kind of expensive. Thankfully, I already had tokens from content I ran before I even started going after this legendary, so I only needed to trade up for about 5 more tokens, and boom, Gift of Craftsmanship acquired. The Gift of Research, though, required me to get 500 hydrocatalytic reagents, a material only gotten from buying them from a vendor, for research notes. 50 notes gets me 10 reagents, totaling a whopping 1,250 research notes, over double what I needed for my Arcanum of Astral Heartbeat. This is where I give yet another shout out to Wizard's Vault for giving me easy access to Ascended gear to salvage, but there wasn't enough in the shop to get me all the notes I needed, so I needed to get a bit creative for the last few hundred notes. See, Ascended gear is able to be stat swapped, but unlike Legendary gear, it requires you to chuck it and other somewhat high value materials in the Mystic Forge in order to do it. Doing this changes the item, if it was a unique weapon, into a generic crafted version. For example, if I took a soldier's prefix Sebeth's broomstick and I wanted to change it to Berserker's, it would turn into a Cobalt Antique musket. If you wanted to use the Ascended gear for a legendary component, like say for instance a precursor, this would be disastrous as you've effectively lost your precursor. But if you're like me and have extra Ascended gear lying around from raids, it's the perfect method for getting some easy research notes. Big thumbs down to ANET for rolling out an update that prevents you from getting research notes with this method anymore. I was able to get all the notes I needed for this piece, but oh shit, it's going to be rough when I get to future legendaries. But for now, I have the 500 reagents I needed to cash in that Gift of Research in the Mystic Forge. Chuck that, the Gift of Craftsmanship, and a Gift of Condensed Magic, and some Mystic Clovers in the Mystic Forge, and out pops the last major component for this legendary, a gift of magical prosperity. Unlike most other legendaries that are crafted in the Mystic Forge, the Soto armors need to be crafted specifically in the expansion's hub area at its crafting tables. So, I ported over to the Wizard's Tower, went to the tailoring table, and finally, months after starting this grind, I obtained the Obsidian Light Regalia. The journey to getting this piece was generally enjoyable. The map completion was fun, with zone layouts that weren't obnoxious to navigate. There were a lot of map currencies to collect, but the events were fun, especially the major events like unlocking Wizard's Tower, so I didn't mind that part of the grind. My only complaint comes from most of the skyscale portions of them. They just aren't that interesting. I wish dodging aerial projectiles on your mount, or even enemies that fight back, were more present here. Doing the rifts always felt like peak MMO gameplay, and while I think the total amount of rift essences needed for this was a lot, the rifts aren't exclusively bound to Soto zones, sort of lightening the load of the repetition. And the research note sync would have definitely been more obtuse if I didn't just have leftover Ascended gear. But it's definitely going to be worse when I inevitably go for Gen 3 and beyond legendaries. But that's a future hurdle to jump through. For now, I want to talk about my new chess piece. I'm so glad to finally have this. I use Mesmer and Necro a lot, so the convenience of being able to stat and appearance change at will, for free, will be greatly appreciated by me. I'm not a big fan of the set as a whole. It doesn't appeal to me as much as the other legendary sets, but the chess piece I really like the look of. It's a nice tuxedo shirt that I haven't seen outside of gem store items, which is huge for me because I try to make my character's outfits with as few Black Lion items as I can. I was originally going to use the skin from my Virtuoso's outfit to try and make something in the style of its concept art, but I liked the look that I had going for it already and eventually ended up using it for my Troubadour, when it released months after getting this armor. And with that, that's my current legendary gear. It took a while to get to all of these, but it was a worth it endeavor. I have gear that can be used across multiple characters and with infinite utility. I chose to talk about this grind in rough chronological order while sticking to a piece of gear section. The beauty of Guild Wars 2 is that it's so open and player friendly with its major grinds that you could be doing a single event and potentially be making progress with all the ones that you're working on. This does have the side effect of making the progression of legendary crafts kind of boring when it comes to rewards, like, oh boy, I'm fighting tooth and nail for fucking mithril ingots, but I feel like it's more about the lengths you go to get all these materials. After all, these legendaries had me doing all sorts of content for their respective expansions, plus extras, so the milestone moments still feel satisfying to get to, because of the sheer volume and variety of stuff I needed to get through for even one component of a legendary. It makes me excited for the content I've yet to experience, but dreadful for the future layers of crafting steps and potential thousands of future materials to collect. But I honestly love playing the game, so any excuse to keep me playing is a good one, and I really am determined to have a full legendary armory, and I want you all to see my journey through it. So tune in next time, where I cash in a bunch of handouts. But until then, stay safe.